Wyoming can't pay its bills. And the reason for that is their economy is shrinking. The freeze on foreign workers and the deportations have stopped people from coming to work, so cattle ranchers don't have people to work on their farms. And just overall, the economy is collapsing as a result of Donald Trump's trade policies and Donald Trump's policies overall, his economic policies. And so as you watch Wyoming, just remember that that's the first domino. There will be others. There'll be other states that are in a similar situation. It might be Florida next as their real estate collapses. And of course, they started to experience this earlier on because of Florida policies about foreign workers. And so as the U.S. economy shrinks, the U.S. economy is going to shrink. We're going to see a situation where the U.S. government may not be able to meet its debt obligations. They will not be able to meet their day-to-day operational obligations. They already struggle to meet that. They borrow, right, to be able to cover it. But as their economy shrinks, their capacity to borrow is going to become significantly reduced. And when they are not in a position to actually meet their debt obligations, period, we are going to see significant problems. And if you were around in the 1970s and you remember what New York was like in the 1970s, New York was basically bankrupt in the 1970s. They sought a federal government bailout, never came. And it was a miserable situation for people. You can get a feel of where things are going to go and how it's going to be with a shrinking U.S. economy. As the U.S. looks inward, they will, they may say, look, we are self-reliant, and yeah, they may be self-reliant. But then they lose all of their business interests outside of the U.S., as we see right now with the boycotts happening around the world. So we'll see a situation where the U.S. is going to discover, unfortunately, a whole new way of living with much less. And it's going to be hurtful for Americans. I understand it. It will be awful, particularly for poorer people. Middle-class people will sink into poverty. People who are upper middle class may have to discover frugality. And it's going to affect the world overall. It's just the way it's going to play out. Now, the interesting thing is if you look at the historic parallels, if you go back to the unfolding of the Great Depression, if you look at the end of the Spanish flu, and you look at just previous downturns, this will be far worse than a downturn, right? Because most previous downturns are something that was either cyclical in the economy or because of some flawed investment scheme like we saw with subprime mortgages. Those were things that were not really structural, and that the rest of the economy was relatively strong, resilient, and could deal with it. But if you look at this, when it's really just structure, just destroying the underlying structure of the economy, it's the type of thing that can happen, and we see a lot of things happening much more quickly than they did in previous historic examples. So I would imagine, within 20 months from now, we are going to see, not just Wyoming, a lot of other states in significant financial problems, cities facing significant financial problems as the tax base shrinks, as the economy shrinks. And overall, the U.S. federal government no longer able to generate the income that it needs to be able to do the things that it needs. So if you think the cuts that are happening now are significant, they're the ones that are triggering a lot of this, right? Taking all those federal employees out of the workforce and taking away their paychecks and having those paychecks being spent in the community, that's a significant thing. But if you think that's bad, just wait until you see the snowball effect that happens when the feedback loop that happens when more and more people lose their jobs. And it will happen quickly because everything seems to happen more quickly these days than it did before. These are troubling times.